The galaxy was quiet when the first signal came, a slow pulse of light and sound carried through the endless dark, steady like a heartbeat that did not belong to any world or any star. The pulse reached the ears of the oldest empires and the youngest colonies, and all across the stars it was heard. It was not a friendly song, nor was it a call for trade or peace. It was heavy, layered with weight, a sound that made even the bravest captain sit back in silence. It was not words at first, it was rhythm, a beat that seemed alive. And with each passing moment the signal grew clearer, as if it wanted to be understood. The great councils gathered, high towers filled with voices of many races, wings spread, claws clicking, eyes burning with fear. Their translators worked without pause, breaking down the waves of sound, the patterns of light, and soon the message revealed itself, simple, sharp, and terrifying. It said only one thing, one order, one demand, that someone must step forward. Step forward to where, they asked. The signal did not answer. It only repeated itself. Step forward, meet us. Do not hide. Do not wait. Step forward now. The word spread through every empire like fire. Leaders argued. Generals trembled. Prophets prayed. Many remembered old stories whispered through ages. Stories of a hunger from the dark, of shapes that came before light itself. Some thought the signal belonged to them. Others thought it was only a test. But none wanted to be the one to answer. The proudest races were the first to turn away. The scaled kings of Drath, who claimed to rule the strongest fleets, declared that their duty was to guard their borders. They would not risk their warships in the unknown void. The winged queens of the Ares said the same. Their skies had cost them too much. They would not gamble them now. The silent lords of the mire spoke last, their shadows stretching across the council floor, and with slow voices they said they would not be fools. One by one, the empires fell quiet, their fear filling the air like smoke. It was a silence heavier than war, because it was the silence of refusal. No one would step forward. No one would answer the call. In the middle of that silence sat the human envoy, small compared to the towering forms of the other races. Their ships were not the largest, their armies not the oldest, their worlds not the richest. Most of the council had nearly forgotten they were even there. Humans were new, fragile, always seen as reckless, too bold, too loud, too unafraid of danger. They did not understand. But when no one spoke, when the proudest of the galaxy bowed their heads and looked away, the humans stood, their steps echoing across the floor, and their voice was steady. It cut through the fear like fire through dry wood. The envoy said 3 words, simple words, words that burned the silence into ash. We will go. The council froze, eyes wide, jaws open, wings twitching. No one moved for a long moment. Then voices burst like storms, cries of madness, shouts of warning, laughter that was not joy but disbelief. They called the humans fools. They called them suicides. They called them blind. But the humans did not sit down. The human repeated their words, we will go. Not because we are stronger, not because we are wiser, not because we are fearless, but because someone must, and no one else will. And we cannot look away. We cannot stand still. We will go. Across the chambers, many watched, and many felt a shiver, not of fear this time, but of something else, something harder to name. The old races whispered that the humans did not know what they were walking into. They whispered that ignorance was the same as bravery, that courage without wisdom was only death. But the humans smiled, and in that smile there was no ignorance, only choice. They had seen war. They had lost worlds to fire and storms. They had tasted hunger. They had buried their own dead by the millions, and still they had always stepped forward, again and again, through pain and through loss. And now they would do it once more. The signal pulsed again, steady, waiting, alive. And this time, when the words came, they seemed to echo louder, as if the ancient voice already knew. Step forward, step forward, step forward. And the humans answered yes. The chamber fell into a deeper silence, not of refusal this time, but of awe. The decision was made, the path was set, and across the galaxy whispers began to spread. Whispers that one race, small and young, had chosen to walk where all others refused. Whispers that the humans would be the ones to face what waited in the dark. And so the story began, with a call no one answered, except the one race that had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Fear was not just a shadow in the galaxy. It was a chain, and when the signal spread, that chain wrapped around every world, every empire, every heart that could feel its pull. The message was simple yet heavy, and with each beat of its pulse more rulers turned their eyes away, more voices fell silent, more empires chose caution over courage. The great halls of the council became places of debate without end, endless circles of blame, of excuses, of hesitation. The scaled kings of Drath spoke with thunder, their words shaking the air as they declared that their fleets were meant for defense, not sacrifice. Their admirals bowed in agreement, and none among them dared to question, for to question was to challenge the pride of a species that lived on conquest and iron. Yet in this moment their conquest had no weight against the unknown. The winged queens of the Ares spread their long feathers wide, shimmering under the council light, and they cried that their people had already given too much in wars of the past. Their cities still bore scars carved by fire and stone. Their skies still echoed with memories of falling wings. They could not risk another wound. They would not risk another fall. So they turned their gaze away and folded their wings tight against their backs, as if to shield themselves from the signal. The Mire Lords whispered from the shadows, their forms twisting like smoke, voices low and cold. They reminded the council of the old prophecies, of the darkness before time, of the ancient hunger that slept beyond the edge of stars. They said the signal was no test, no challenge, no game. It was bait, and any who answered would be swallowed. And in their whispers there was power, for the council listened, and fear grew. One after another the empire spoke, and one after another they refused. Their words clothed in reason, but beneath every reason was the same truth. They were afraid not of losing ships or soldiers, but of losing everything, their thrones, their bloodlines, their names carved into history, their control over the order of the galaxy. Fear was not just in their hearts, it was in their bones, and it ruled them. The humans watched, listening in silence, their envoys sitting still among giants, their form small, their skin soft, their voice not yet raised, for they saw what the others could not admit, that fear had become the greatest enemy in the chamber, greater even than the unknown that waited in the dark beyond the stars. On the worlds of the empires, fear spread like fire through dry grass. Merchants whispered in markets, soldiers muttered in their barracks, children looked to the skies with wide eyes. No one wanted to believe that something older, stronger, and stranger than all they knew was watching them, calling them, waiting for them. So they clung to the silence of their rulers, and silence became safety. Or so they told themselves. But silence was never safety. It was only surrender. The signal did not fade. It did not weaken. Its pulse grew sharper, clearer, each beat like a drum calling the galaxy to account. And the more it called, the more the weight of fear pressed down, like a hand on the throat of every world. In private chambers, rulers argued with their generals, generals argued with their scholars, and scholars argued with themselves. They searched for explanations, for cracks in the meaning of the signal. Perhaps it was only a dying star. Perhaps it was only the remnant of a dead empire. Perhaps it was nothing at all. Yet each new guess ended in silence, because deep inside they knew. This was not random. This was not accident. This was will, and will was dangerous. The fear grew heavy in the council chamber, until even voices began to break. Arguments faltered. Words crumbled. Leaders who once ruled with iron were reduced to whispers. No one wished to be the one who sent their people into the abyss. No one wanted to carry the blame. So they waited, hoping another would rise, hoping another would fall into the trap first. But none did. The humans had listened long enough. Their envoy rose again, and though the chamber was filled with giants, though the walls were heavy with silence, their small voice carried, and it cut the silence with a sharp edge. The human said, "We are not blind. We are not deaf. We hear the fear in your voices, but fear cannot be the answer. Fear has never been the answer." The chamber roared with anger, voices crashing over the human like storms, fools. They shouted, reckless, suicidal. You do not understand. You do not know what waits. You do not know the cost. But the human did not sit. They stood taller, their eyes steady, and they spoke again. We do know the cost. The cost is life itself, and life has always been paid with blood and struggle. but without stepping forward there will be no life at all. The scaled kings hissed with rage, their claws tearing the stone beneath them. The winged queens flared their feathers in fury. The mire lords whispered curses darker than night. But in every curse there was an echo of fear, because deep inside they envied the humans, envied that one small race dared to speak where all others trembled. Far beyond the chamber, across the stars, whispers began to spread, whispers that the humans had not refused, that they had spoken boldly, that they had promised to step forward, and those whispers spread faster than fear itself, into the hearts of common folk, into the minds of soldiers and wanderers, and some began to wonder, if a small race from a single small world could dare, then what excuse did the great empires have? The council tried to bury the words, to silence the whispers, to drown them in threats and denials. But words once spoken cannot be caged, and courage once shown cannot be unseen. The humans had thrown a spark into the darkness, and no fear could smother it. The weight of fear pressed down harder than ever, but the humans did not bow, and that was what made the galaxy tremble. For if fear ruled the great empires, then perhaps courage would rule the small. And if the signal had been a trap, then perhaps it was a trap the humans were willing to walk into, not because they were fearless, but because they understood fear. They had lived with it, fought with it, and carried it like a burden through every step of their history. Fear was not new to them. It was an old companion, and they knew how to keep walking even while it whispered in their ears. As the council dissolved into chaos, as voices clashed and wings tore the air and claws scraped the stone, the human envoy turned and walked out, their steps calm, their face steady, and in their silence there was more power than in all the shouts behind them, for the decision was already made, the choice already taken. The humans would step forward. The weight of fear was heavy, but on that day, for the first time, it shifted, and somewhere in the shadows of the chamber, an old mire lord whispered, "Perhaps the dark will not swallow them. Perhaps the dark will swallow us instead." And with those words, the fear of the galaxy no longer belonged to the signal. It belonged to the humans who had dared to defy it. And the galaxy knew that nothing would be the same again. The human ship rose from the surface of its world in silence, its engines burning pale blue against the endless black of the void. No banners waved. No grand music was played. No grand fleets followed. There was only the quiet farewell of a species that had chosen to answer when no other dared. And as the vessel drifted beyond the reach of its home atmosphere, the eyes of 100 empires watched from afar. The crew aboard were not chosen by force. No chains had brought them there. Each had stepped forward willingly. Some were soldiers hardened by old wars, their scars carried proudly across their skin. Some were scientists who had spent their lives chasing the unknown, their minds sharpened by curiosity stronger than fear. Some were explorers, wanderers who had always walked beyond the map, who had always hungered for what lay past the next horizon, and together they formed the heart of the mission. The corridors of the ship hummed with life, yet within that hum was a strange quiet. Each member of the crew knew the weight they carried, the knowledge that entire galaxies had turned their backs, that the strongest armies and the oldest rulers had chosen to hide, and so every step they took, every breath they shared, was heavy with meaning, for they were not just traveling for themselves, they were traveling for all. The signal grew louder with each passing day, pulsing through their instruments, vibrating through the walls of the ship. Sometimes the crew swore they could feel it in their bones, as if the sound was alive and reaching for them. The rhythm was steady, unbroken, like a heart that had been beating since before time began, and though no one could name its source, they all knew it was waiting, patient, watching, calling them ever closer. Stars stretched across the void like rivers of fire. Constellations twisted into strange shapes as their path bent toward the unknown. There were moments when shadows flickered at the edges of their sight, shapes that did not belong to planets or ships, forms that shifted in the darkness as if the void itself had eyes, and when the crew tried to track them with sensors they vanished, leaving only silence behind, a silence sharper than any blade. Nights were restless on the ship, though nights had no meaning in space. Still the crew felt them, long hours where the lights dimmed and their thoughts grew louder. Some whispered to each other about what they believed waited at the end. Some spoke of gods, others of monsters, others of machines older than stars, and a few said nothing, keeping their fears locked away in silence, for fear spoken too often can become real, and they could not allow it to grow. The captain walked the corridors often, their face calm though their heart carried the same weight as all the others. They reminded the crew that fear was natural, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to keep moving through it. Their words carried strength, and though they did not erase the fear, they gave it shape, and shaped fear can be endured. The ship crossed into regions no chart had ever marked. Here the stars grew thin, fewer and farther between, and the blackness grew heavier, pressing on the hull like an ocean without end. Navigation grew uncertain, instruments flickered, strange signals interfered. Sometimes the stars themselves seemed to shift, yet still they pressed forward, guided not by maps but by the steady beat of the signal. Days stretched into weeks, and the crew felt time itself bend. Some swore the clocks were lying, that hours slipped faster or slower than they should. Others felt as if they had lived entire lifetimes within the endless dark. Yet the ship did not falter, its engines roared, its path remained steady, and the humans did not turn back. At the edges of the void, strange lights appeared, not the bright glow of stars, but faint flickers, green and blue and silver, dancing in the distance like lanterns on a shore no one had ever seen. The crew watched them with awe and unease, for they did not move as stars should. They swirled, they blinked, they followed, as though alive, as though curious. Whispers spread among the crew that perhaps they were being watched, not by one thing but by many, unseen eyes tracking their every movement, weighing their worth, judging their steps. Yet even in that fear, they did not break. They adjusted their course. They moved forward, for there was no turning back now, not when the entire galaxy waited to see if they would falter. The signal grew sharper, no longer a distant pulse, but a voice that brushed against the edge of thought. Not words yet, not meaning, only pressure, like a hand against the mind. Some crew reported dreams of strange landscapes, worlds without light, oceans of fire, skies filled with endless eyes. Others dreamed of silence, deeper than death, and they woke with their hearts racing, sweat covering their skin. But even in those dreams there was something constant, the pull forward, always forward. At last the signal stopped, not faded, not weakened, but stopped, cut off in an instant as if someone had closed a door, and the silence it left was heavier than all the sound before. The crew gathered at the observation deck, staring into the dark ahead, their breath shallow, their eyes wide, for something waited there, something vast, something that filled the void with its presence. At first they thought it was a planet, round and massive, too large to be natural, its surface smooth and dark as stone, veined with cracks of glowing light that pulsed like veins. But then it moved, and they knew it was no planet. It was a structure, a construct of unimaginable scale, alive with energy older than their suns. The ship slowed, its engines humming low. The crew stood silent, their fear now joined by awe, for they had reached the end of their journey, or perhaps only the beginning. The object did not attack. It did not flee. It only waited, vast and silent, its glowing veins pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat that was not their own. Across the galaxy, alien eyes watched through distant machines. Every empire that had refused now tuned their instruments to witness what the humans would do. Some prayed for their destruction. Others hoped for their survival. But none could look away, for this was the moment all had feared, and the humans were the only ones brave or reckless enough to face it. The human captain raised their voice, steady and clear, and though the words were simple, they carried through the silence like fire through dry wood. "We have come. We step forward. We are here." The object stirred, light rippling across its massive form, cracks widening, energy pouring out like rivers of flame, and the void itself seemed to shiver as it turned toward them. And then, from deep within, something opened, vast and endless, and the ship was drawn into the eye of the dark. At first the humans thought they were facing only a world, a sphere that glowed faintly with cracks of silver fire, its surface dark and smooth like stone. But the longer they looked, the more they realized it was alive with movement. Vast plates shifted across its body, slow and deliberate like the breathing of a giant, and the veins of light pulsed as if they were not metal or stone at all but arteries, feeding a heart too large to understand. The ship hung before it like a grain of sand before a mountain, The crew standing in silence as they stared through the observation deck, their voices caught in their throats, their minds struggling to hold what their eyes saw. For this was no machine built by hands they could imagine. It was no planet formed by nature. It was something between, something that broke the line between life and creation, and its scale was greater than anything they had been told to expect. Across the galaxy, the alien empires tuned their instruments, and their eyes widened in horror. The scaled kings of Drath trembled, though they would never admit it, their generals whispering that even their greatest fleets would be nothing but sparks before such a thing. The winged queens of Ares spread their feathers and wept in silence, their prophecies warning that such a shape meant the awakening of forces beyond their skies. The Mire lords whispered no words at all, the shadows recoiling into deeper darkness, for they had seen this shape once before in their oldest memory, and they had sworn never to face it again. The humans did not turn away. Their ship pressed forward, its engines humming against the weight of fear, every crew member holding their breath as the dark shape stirred, and from deep within the cracks of light a sound began to rise, not through the ears, but through the bones, a deep vibration that shook every nerve, that pressed against every thought, a sound that felt like the sky itself speaking. It was not language at first, it was rhythm, the same pulse that had guided them across the stars, now sharper, closer, more alive, and as it grew the crew felt their hearts beating to match it, as if their very lives were being tuned to the breath of the giant before them. And in that moment they knew they were seen, not by chance, but by choice, for this thing, this world, this being, had called them. The ship drifted closer, guided not by engines, but by some unseen pull, space itself bending like a tide drawing them inward. The captain ordered steady hands, their voice calm though their eyes burned with awe. They reminded the crew that they had chosen this path, that to turn back now would be to betray not only themselves, but all who had believed in their courage. And so the humans braced themselves as the shape filled their view. From afar the alien watchers whispered in disbelief. Many had sworn the humans would turn away at the first sight of danger. Many had sworn their fragile hearts would fail them. But here the fragile ones pressed forward, while the mighty watched in silence, their pride crumbling, their fear twisting into shame. And across the stars the name of humanity began to echo, no longer spoken with dismissal, but with a shiver of respect and dread. The surface of the being opened, vast plates sliding apart with the sound of mountains grinding, revealing within not darkness, but endless light, rivers of silver and gold flowing like fire, patterns moving like veins beneath skin, and at the center a void deeper than any the humans had ever known. It was an eye, vast and unblinking, staring at them with the weight of eternity, and in that gaze they felt small, smaller than they had ever known, yet also chosen, called, invited. The captain raised their hand, as if to steady their crew, and whispered words that carried like iron through the silence. "We are here. We will not turn away." And as those words hung in the air the being stirred again, its eye glowing brighter, its light flooding across the ship, filling every corridor with radiance, and the humans felt themselves lifted, carried, as if their vessel was no longer moving through engines, but through will. Inside the minds of the crew images began to form, visions pressed upon them by the gaze of the being. They saw stars collapsing, worlds burning, fleets shattered like glass, voices screaming in languages unknown. They saw the birth of galaxies, fire and dust swirling into life. They saw endless ages, where empires rose and fell like sparks, and through it all the shape remained, watching, waiting eternal. Some among the crew fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of it. Others clutched their heads as the visions pressed harder, but none turned away. None begged for release, for even in the terror there was wonder, even in the fear there was awe, and they knew this was why they had come, to see, to know, to face what no one else would. The eye blinked once, slow as centuries, and then a voice came, not from outside but from within, vast and thunderous, speaking not to ears but to souls, and it asked only one question: who answers the summons? The crew froze, their hearts trembling, their voices caught, yet before the silence could claim them the captain stepped forward, their voice steady, and they answered with words that would echo across the stars. "We are human. We answer. We step forward, and we are not afraid." Across the galaxy the watchers gasped. The scaled kings cursed. The winged queens wept again. The mire lords recoiled deeper into shadow. But none could deny the truth. The humans had spoken. The humans had claimed the summons. And the ancient being had heard. The eye glowed brighter, its light pouring out like rivers across the void. And the ship was swallowed whole, drawn into the body of the giant, into the heart of something older than their sons. And as they vanished from the sight of the galaxy, a silence fell heavier than before. For now the question was no longer who would answer, but what the answer would cost. The alien races whispered that the humans were doomed, that no one could walk into the mouth of eternity and return. Yet others whispered differently, that perhaps the humans would survive, that perhaps they were meant to survive. For why else would the summons have been given at all? And those whispers spread like sparks, igniting fear and hope alike across the stars. Inside the ship, the crew stood in darkness, lit only by the glow of the being's veins, the walls around them pulsing with life, and they felt the weight of 1,000 eyes watching them, unseen but present, ancient but aware, and in that silence they knew the true journey had only just begun. The silence within the being was deeper than space itself. The human ship drifted through a tunnel of light and shadow, its hull shaking as if the void itself pressed against it. The crew stood still, their hearts pounding, their breath shallow, for though they had seen wonders, already they knew this was only the beginning, the first step into the unknown that had called them across the stars. The walls around them pulsed like veins, glowing with streams of silver and gold, each beat carrying power, so vast it made their instruments scream with warnings. Yet no fire burned them, no weapon struck them. They were not destroyed. They were only carried deeper, as if the being wanted them to see, to witness, to understand what it was. The captain's voice rang steady through the corridors, reminding the crew to stand tall, to hold fast, for they had chosen this path with open eyes. Fear was natural, but fear would not command them. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to walk forward despite it. And so they steadied their hands and their hearts as the ship moved into a vast chamber larger than worlds. Before them stretched an endless sky within the body of the being. Stars burned above, though no stars should exist here. Rivers of light poured downward into oceans that shimmered with liquid fire. Mountains of crystal rose higher than continents, and at the center stood a pillar of black stone reaching into infinity. The crew stared in awe, unable to tell if what they saw was real or illusion. But it mattered little, for they knew they had entered the place where the trial would begin. The voice returned, vast and thunderous, shaking the marrow of their bones, not sound but thought that pressed upon them, and it asked again, "Who answers the summons?" The captain stepped forward, their hand upon the railing, and with a voice steady as iron they answered, "We are human. We stand here. We have come because no one else would. We have come because someone must, and we are not afraid." The chamber trembled, the pillar of stone cracked, and from its heart poured visions, streams of memory not their own. A storm of images that wrapped around the crew and dragged them inward. They saw stars burning out one by one, fleets of ships shattered into dust, worlds screaming as fire devoured them. They heard voices in countless tongues crying out for help, begging for mercy, and always the darkness swallowed them whole. It was despair without end. The trial had begun. The crew staggered, some falling to their knees as the visions clawed into their minds. They felt their own deaths. They felt the deaths of strangers. They felt the weight of endless failure pressing down on their chests. The voice roared in their thoughts. Can you face this? Can you stand against what devours all? Can you bear the burden of fear? The visions sharpened, children crying, soldiers screaming, cities burning, oceans boiling, the end of everything. Yet the humans did not fall, not all. Some gritted their teeth, their hands clutching the walls of the ship. Some wept but still stood. Some shouted against the storm, their voices raw but unbroken, for they had known war. They had known hunger. They had known despair on their own fragile world. They had seen empires rise and collapse. They had buried their dead and kept walking. And though the vision of universal ruin tore at them, it could not erase what was carved into their hearts. The knowledge that they had always endured. The captain raised their voice above the storm. Words carried not only to the crew, but to the being itself. We see your fear. We see your darkness. But we do not turn. We do not break. We walk with fear, but fear does not rule us. For we are human, and we will keep stepping forward, again and again, until there is no ground left beneath our feet, and even then we will crawl if we must. But we will not stop. The visions shuddered, the storm faltered, as if struck by the force of will. The voice grew softer though no less vast. Why are you not afraid? Why do you stand when others fall? What gives you strength when empires fail? And the humans answered not with pride but with truth. They spoke of their small world, of their wars and their scars, of their storms and their plagues, of the endless struggles that had nearly destroyed them time and again. Yet always they had risen, always they had fought to live, always they had carried fear upon their shoulders and still walked forward. The chamber grew still, the visions fading, the oceans of fire calming, the mountains of crystal glowing faintly as if listening. The eye within the pillar blinked once, and then a new trial rose, shadows pouring from the cracks of a stone, tall forms shaped like nightmares, their bodies shifting like smoke, their eyes burning like suns. They moved with hunger, surrounding the ship, pressing against the crew, whispering doubts, hissing lies, telling them they would fail, telling them they were nothing, telling them they would be forgotten. The crew drew together, standing shoulder to shoulder, their fear thick in the air, yet their courage brighter still. They raised weapons though they knew weapons would do little against shadows. They shouted at the dark though their voices cracked. They reminded each other of why they had come, of the silence of the council, of the weight they carried for all who had turned away, and together they stood against the swarm. The shadows struck, a tide of claws and fangs, but the humans did not yield. They fired though no bullet struck true. They swung though no blade cut deep. Still they stood, still they fought, for the fight itself was the trial, and the being watched, and the galaxy far beyond watched too through their distant instruments, their hearts trembling as they saw the fragile race refusing to bow where all others had fled. Hours passed like moments, or moments passed like hours. Time lost meaning in the storm, until at last the shadows broke apart, dissolving into streams of silver, fading back into the cracks of the stone, leaving only silence and the heavy breath of the crew, battered but unbroken, wounded but standing, afraid but alive. The voice returned once more, softer now, almost curious, almost reverent. You have faced the trial. You have stood where others fell. You have shown the truth of your kind. And though the words were not praise, they were not condemnation either. They were something else, something heavier, a recognition, a naming, as if the being now understood what it faced. The humans did not cheer. They did not weep. They only breathed, steady and slow, for they knew this was only the first, that more trials waited, that the path ahead would grow darker still. But they had taken the step. They had faced the storm. They had endured the weight of fear, and they had not broken. And as the light of the chamber dimmed, as the ship drifted deeper into the heart of the being, the crew knew that the galaxy outside had heard, that the alien empires who had refused now whispered in awe and dread, that the name of humanity was no longer spoken with dismissal, but with unease, and that the first trial was only the beginning of a test that would shape the fate of all. The chamber into which the humans were carried after the first trial was quiet, not the silence of death, but the silence of breath held between storms. The ship drifted slowly into a vast hall, where the walls curved like the inside of a great sphere, veins of light running across them in rivers that pulsed with energy too ancient to name. The crew stood still, their bodies tired, their minds heavy, yet their hearts unbroken. For though they had faced the vision of despair and the shadows of fear, they still stood, and that truth gave them strength. The voice returned, softer than before, less thunder, more whisper, and it asked not with anger, but with curiosity. Why? Why do you continue? Why do you not break? Why do you speak of courage when all empires hide in their fear? What is it within you that makes you stand when all others fall? What is the strength that holds you? The captain stepped forward, their boots echoing across the deck, their shoulders heavy yet unbowed, their voice carrying across the hall not with pride but with plain truth. It is not that we do not fear. It is that we walk with fear. It is not that we are stronger. It is that we have been broken many times and have risen again. It is not that we are eternal. It is that we fight knowing we are small, knowing we will die, knowing our days are numbered, and yet we live them with fire. That is our strength. Images rose in the chamber at the captain's words, not visions forced upon them this time, but memories drawn from their hearts. Pictures of Earth, oceans vast and storming, mountains carved with snow, forests burning and regrowing, cities shining and crumbling, people laughing in the light and weeping in the dark, armies marching, children playing, families grieving, explorers gazing at new horizons, inventors building, lovers holding hands against the wind, all of it fragile, all of it mortal, yet all of it burning with life. The crew watched their own history flicker across the walls, and though their eyes watered, though their hearts ached, they stood taller, for this was who they were, not perfect, not eternal, but alive, alive in ways that no shadow of fear could erase, alive in ways that no silence of the galaxy could deny. The voice pressed again. Why do you choose to suffer? Why do you walk through pain when you could hide? Why do you rise when falling would be easier? And the crew answered together, their voices many yet one, because suffering is part of living, because pain is part of growing, because to hide is to die without ever living, because to fall without rising is to give up all that makes us human. We are not made of stone or fire. We are made of flesh and blood and spirit, fragile but fierce, and in our fragility we find strength. The chamber shook as if those words struck the very walls, the rivers of light flaring brighter, and the crew felt warmth spread through the hall, not heat that burned but light that lifted, as if the being itself was breathing with them, listening to them, and within that warmth came new visions, not of despair but of possibility, worlds unscarred, stars blooming, children yet unborn laughing beneath skies that no one had seen, futures unmade but waiting, paths unwalked but calling, and the crew felt tears slip down their faces, for even in the dark, even in the heart of an ancient trial, hope could still burn. The captain spoke again, their words steady, their voice carrying like steel wrapped in fire. You asked what gives us strength. It is this, the will to hope when hope seems lost, the will to love though love can be broken, the will to stand though standing hurts, the will to dream though dreams can die. It is this heart that carries us, fragile yet unyielding, scarred yet unbroken. This is the heart of humanity. Across the galaxy the alien empires listened, their instruments capturing every word, their rulers trembling, for they had hidden from the summons because they had thought strength was measured in fleets and armies, in walls of steel and weapons of fire. Yet here was a small race showing that strength was something else, something deeper, something they had long forgotten, and in their fear they felt envy, and in their envy they felt shame. The voice of the being grew quieter still, almost like a breath, and it spoke again. Perhaps you are the ones we sought. Perhaps your heart is what was missing. Perhaps in your fragility there is a fire that the stars have lost. Yet the words carried no answer, only more weight, for with recognition came responsibility, and the humans felt that weight settle heavier upon their shoulders. The crew stood together, their hands on one another's shoulders, their eyes locked with resolve. They did not cheer. They did not claim victory. They only breathed, for they knew that this was not the end, that the voice would test them again, that the heart of humanity had been seen but not yet proven, and proof would demand more than words. It would demand sacrifice. The walls of the chamber shifted, the rivers of light folding inward, forming doors of brilliance that opened into deeper dark. The ship was pulled onward, carried by currents unseen, and as the light of the hall faded behind them, the crew looked forward, their fear walking beside them, their hope burning within them, for they knew the trials were far from over. In the distant stars the galaxy whispered, some saying the humans were mad, others saying they were chosen, some saying they would be destroyed, others saying they would change everything, but all agreed on one truth. The humans had stepped forward when all others refused, and the galaxy would never forget it. The captain closed their eyes for a moment, whispering to themselves words too soft for others to hear, a promise to their people, to their world, to their ancestors buried in the soil of Earth. We will not fail. And though the words were quiet, the fire in them was vast, and the crew felt it echo in their hearts. The ship drifted into the unknown once more, and the being's voice faded into silence, leaving only the echo of its last words. Perhaps you are the ones we sought. And though the crew did not know what those words meant fully, though they could not see the path ahead, they held them close, like a flame in the dark, for in the heart of humanity was the strength to keep walking, no matter how deep the shadows grew. The ship drifted deeper into the heart of the ancient being, the corridors around it narrowing and widening like the breath of a sleeping titan. Veins of silver and gold glowed faintly in the dark, guiding them forward like rivers through night. The crew stood at their posts, weary yet unbroken, knowing they had already faced despair and shadow, knowing they had shown the heart of humanity, yet knowing too that the true end had not yet arrived. The silence that pressed upon them was heavy, but it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of waiting, as though the being itself was deciding, as though the galaxy itself held its breath. And across the stars the empires watched with eyes wide, none daring to speak too loudly, none daring to admit their shame, for the humans had walked where all others refused, and each passing moment carved that truth deeper into history. At last the ship entered a vast chamber unlike any they had seen, larger than planets, brighter than suns, a hollow sphere where the walls were alive with endless fire, spirals of light twisting like galaxies within galaxies, and at the very center a throne of darkness floated, carved now stone but a void itself, and on that throne a figure began to rise. It was not shaped like human or alien, it was not beast or machine, it was shifting shadow and burning star, a form that seemed to hold every face, every claw, every wing, every memory of the empires that had come before. It looked at them with eyes that were not eyes, and the weight of that gaze bent the air around them. The crew felt themselves small again, smaller than thought, smaller than breath, yet they did not fall. The voice spoke, vast and endless. You have walked through fear. You have stood in shadow. You have shown your heart. Yet one truth remains. Will you bow? Will you kneel? Will you submit to the darkness that devours? And as those words rang through them, the crew felt the pressure of surrender, the temptation of silence, the comfort of laying down their burden and fading into nothing. For surrender would be easy. Surrender would end the pain. Surrender would end the trial. But the humans did not kneel. The captain stepped forward, their body trembling under the weight, their voice raw yet steady. We cannot bow, for to bow is to deny what we are. We are fragile, but we endure. We are small, but we rise. We are mortal, but we burn, and fear may walk beside us, but it does not rule us. We will not kneel, not to shadow, not to silence, not to despair, for to kneel is to betray every step we have taken, every tear we have shed, every dream we have carried, and we cannot betray them. The throne of darkness shook, the figure upon it twisting, its many faces screaming, its light burning hotter, and from it poured a storm of terror greater than before, visions of endless defeat, waves of destruction, the collapse of stars, the silence of every voice that had ever spoken. The crew staggered, their knees shaking, their eyes blinded by the flood, yet they held on, their hands clutching one another, their hearts beating as one, for they knew this was the last trial, the trial of surrender. The alien empires watching whispered in awe, for they saw fragile humans standing against the weight that had broken countless races before. They saw them tremble, but not fall. They saw them bleed, but not kneel. And in their whispers there was fear still. But it was a new fear, not of the summons, not of the dark, but of humanity itself. For they understood now that this small race would not bow where even the mighty had fled. The crew raised their voices together, shouting into the storm, not words of defiance, but words of truth. We are afraid, but we walk through fear. We are weak, but we rise together. We are small, but we endure. And in our endurance we find strength, and in our strength we find hope, and in our hope we find fire, and that fire will not bow. The throne cracked, the darkness split, light pouring from within. The figure screamed with 1,000 voices, and then it bowed, not in surrender, not in defeat, but in recognition, its head lowering, its light dimming, its shadow folding inward. And the voice spoke once more, softer now, reverent now. When all others refused, you stepped forward. When all others hid, you stood. When all others bowed, you did not. Humanity, the fire of your heart has been seen, and fear bows to you. The crew stood in silence, tears falling from some, laughter breaking from others, their bodies shaking with exhaustion, their spirits burning with triumph. They had faced the summons. They had faced the trials. They had refused to kneel, and they had been recognized. not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as those who endured, as those who walked with fear and yet stepped forward. The chamber began to fade, the throne dissolving into rivers of silver, the light pouring into the walls, the figure vanishing into the endless fire, and the ship was carried outward, back through the corridors of veins and shadow, back through the body of the being, until once more they looked upon the stars beyond, the void vast and cold, yet no longer empty, for now it was filled with meaning. Across the galaxy the empires trembled, their rulers silent, their armies still, for they had seen the moment when fear bowed, and they knew the truth could not be erased. They could deny it, they could curse it, they could hate it, but they could not erase it. The humans had stepped forward, and the galaxy had watched, and nothing would ever be the same. The crew stood together, their hearts weary yet burning, their eyes gazing into the dark beyond, where new signals now pulsed, faint but rising, echoes of other summons, other trials, waiting to be faced. The captain looked to the crew, their voice steady though soft. This is not the end. This is the beginning, and we will answer again, for fear may rise, but humanity will always step forward. The ship turned its nose toward the dark, engines roaring, hearts united, and as it vanished into the void the galaxy whispered in awe, whispered in dread, whispered in hope, that when all others refused, when all others bowed, there was one race that did not. And from that day forward the stars themselves remembered the truth, that fear bows before humanity.